At 2:47 a.m. on a February night, when the temperature had dropped to minus 48 degrees, the emergency transmission came through, and Alaska State Trooper Jack Petersen received a jumbled distress call that would expose him to the worst aspects of human nature. Through the blizzard, the satellite phone hardly worked, but 3 words were audible. "They're eating us." The dispatcher's voice struggled against shrieking static as it said, "Trooper Petersen, this is Bush Pilot Station. We have a mayday from Coldstone Village. There are 73 people living there." The caller claimed that neighbors were being attacked and eaten. The line then died. During his 21 years of service in the interior of Alaska, Petersen had dealt with murders, bear attacks, hypothermia deaths, and every other calamity that the frigid wilderness could bring. However, it was hard to understand cannibalism in a contemporary village. What's the weather situation? Blizzard weather? Almost no visibility. For at least 18 hours, no plane can get to the village. However, Trooper Yates is already on his way from a patrol 30 miles away on a snowmobile. She could arrive in Coldstone in 2 hours. Speaking 3 Inuit dialects and having grown up in Alaska's indigenous communities, Trooper Amanda Yates was more familiar with the harsh realities of winter survival than any transplant from the lower 48. She was the only one who could make it to Coldstone in a blizzard. Petersen, already preparing for the grueling journey, gave the order, "Tell Yates to wait for backup. From Fairbanks, I'm bringing a snow machine." ETA was 90 minutes behind her. Yates, however, didn't wait. 40 minutes later, her voice was tight with barely contained fear as she transmitted, "We're approaching Coldstone now. The lights of the village are visible to me. Everything is illuminated, but aside from one central building, there is no movement and no smoke coming from the chimneys. Something is amiss. Yates, don't go into that village by yourself. It's an order. I'm doing external reconnaissance, so copy that. There are corpses in the streets, Trooper Petersen. Through the blizzard, several casualties were visible. I'm noting places and..." With a scream, her transmission ended. Petersen pushed his snowmobile to dangerous speeds through conditions that could kill within minutes if he broke down. The blizzard created whiteout conditions where earth and sky merged into one deadly blur, where familiar landmarks became alien landscapes, where death waited in every direction. He reached Coldstone 90 minutes later to find Yates's snowmobile abandoned at the village perimeter, still running, emergency lights flashing. Her rifle lay in the snow, unfired. Boot prints led toward the central building she'd mentioned, but they were quickly being obscured by fresh snowfall. The village was a nightmare scene of Arctic horror. Bodies lay frozen in the streets, not from weather, but from violence. Massive trauma, limbs missing, evidence of feeding. The snow around each corpse was stained dark, frozen blood creating grotesque sculptures of death. Every building was indeed lit, but the lights flickered in synchronized patterns that suggested deliberate coordination rather than electrical malfunction. And from the central structure, a community hall that served as meeting place and emergency shelter, came sounds of movement and what might have been chanting. Petersen approached with weapon drawn, every survival instinct screaming danger. Through windows thick with frost, he could see the village's survivors, maybe 30 people out of 73, arranged in a circle around what looked like a primitive altar constructed from furniture and personal possessions. And in the center of that circle, Trooper Amanda Yates hung suspended by ropes, conscious but unable to move, while the villagers discussed her in a language Petersen didn't recognize despite years in Alaska. He kicked in the door with weapon raised. "Alaska State Troopers." Everyone on the ground now. The villagers turned as one, their movements synchronized in a way that human coordination shouldn't allow. Their faces were streaked with frozen blood, their winter clothing torn and stained, their eyes reflecting the firelight with something that looked almost animalistic. "Trooper Petersen," spoke the village elder, a woman named Mary Aktoak, whom Petersen had met at community meetings. Her voice was her own, but layered with harmonics that suggested multiple people speaking through one throat. "You shouldn't have come. The hunger has already taken this village. Soon it will spread across the entire region. Release Trooper Yates immediately." "We can't. She's been chosen as the next vessel. The hunger needs strong hosts, and she has the resilience to survive the transformation." Petersen saw that Yates was conscious, her eyes tracking him with desperate awareness. She tried to speak, through whatever gag or paralysis prevented communication. "What hunger? What the hell happened to this village?" Mary Aktoak gestured to the altar, where human remains had been arranged in disturbing patterns. 3 weeks ago, a research team came through. Scientists studying permafrost melt and released organisms. They dug into ancient ice layers and disturbed something that had been frozen for millennia, parasites that evolved to survive in extreme cold by manipulating host behavior. She continued with terrible calm. "The parasites enter through any opening, mouth, nose, wounds. They migrate to the brain and alter neural chemistry, creating insatiable hunger for human flesh, while simultaneously making the host crave colder temperatures. The infected actively seek out freezing conditions and prey on other humans." "That's insane. Parasites don't cause cannibalism." "These do. They evolved in an ice age, in conditions where the only available food was other members of their host species. They're not just parasites, they're consciousness modulators that override human behavioral inhibitions." Detective Carl Jensen's voice crackled through Petersen's radio, weak but present. "Trooper Petersen, this is Jensen. I'm monitoring from Fairbanks. CDC just confirmed reports of unusual parasites in permafrost samples taken from this region. They're classified as extremophiles with neurological effects on mammals." Mary Aktoak smiled, with too many teeth showing. "The scientists who released us tried to contain the outbreak. Their bodies are buried in the snow outside. We ate them first, while the hunger was still new, and we thought we could resist it. But the parasites are too strong. They make human flesh taste better than any food we've ever known, make the act of hunting and consuming other people feel natural and necessary." "How many are infected?" "Everyone who was in the village when it started. 37 people consumed the others. And now we're still hungry. The parasites want us to spread, to infect other communities. That's why we've been lighting all the buildings, signaling to nearby villages that something's wrong, hoping rescue teams will come and give us new hosts to share the hunger with." Petersen realized the horrifying truth. The village hadn't called for help because they needed rescue. They'd called to lure more victims into the trap. "Yates hasn't been infected yet," Mary continued. "We've been keeping her pure, undamaged. When we infect her, the parasites will have access to her knowledge of other villages, her patrol routes, her understanding of Alaska State Trooper operations. She'll help us spread efficiently across the entire region." Petersen fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "Everyone step away from Trooper Yates. I will use lethal force." But the infected villagers didn't fear death. They rushed him as a coordinated unit, moving with precision that suggested the parasites were creating a hive intelligence. Petersen fired into the mass, dropping 3, but there were too many. They were too coordinated, and they weren't stopping despite gunshot wounds. He fought hand to hand, his cold weather gear offering some protection from bites. But he knew he was being overwhelmed. The infected were trying to capture rather than kill him. They wanted him as another vessel. Yates suddenly broke free from her restraints with strength that shouldn't have been possible given her suspension. She grabbed Petersen's backup weapon and fired with precision, creating an opening to the door. "Run!" she screamed. "I released myself 5 minutes ago, but stayed to see what they'd reveal. We need to get out now and burn this entire village." They fled into the blizzard with the infected villagers pursuing. But the parasites had given their hosts too much hunger for cold. Instead of seeking shelter, the infected ran into the -48-degree storm without adequate protection, their parasite-modified brains telling them the freezing temperatures were desirable. Within minutes, hypothermia began taking the pursuers. Their human bodies couldn't survive conditions the parasites had evolved to tolerate. They collapsed in the snow, freezing to death, while their parasite-enhanced brains still craved the deadly cold. Petersen and Yates reached the snowmobiles and radioed for emergency response. Within hours, CDC and military containment teams descended on Coldstone. The village was quarantined, every infected person either frozen dead or sedated and isolated for study. The parasites died when their hosts froze, Dr. Benjamin Park explained during the debriefing. They had evolved for Ice Age megafauna with different thermal tolerances. Modern humans can't survive the temperatures the parasites drive them toward. "How many might have escaped?" Petersen asked. "None from Coldstone. But the permafrost melt that released these organisms is happening across the entire Arctic. We could be looking at multiple emergence sites, thousands of square miles where ancient parasites are thawing and seeking hosts." Alaska established new protocols for responding to isolated village emergencies, screening for parasitic infection, monitoring for behavioral changes consistent with the Coldstone outbreak. But Petersen knew the truth. Humanity was entering an era where climate change wasn't just melting ice. It was releasing organisms that had been frozen since the last ice age, creatures that had evolved to survive in conditions and manipulate hosts in ways modern humans couldn't imagine. The hunger was still out there, waiting in ancient ice, ready to turn humans against each other with biological imperatives that overrode millions of years of social evolution. 4 months after Coldstone, Trooper Petersen faced a new phenomenon that seemed completely unrelated until patterns emerged connecting it to Alaska's unique electromagnetic environment. It began with reports from the small settlement of Northern Lights Ridge, population 34, where people were vanishing during intense aurora borealis displays. "Trooper Petersen, we've lost contact with 8 residents over the past 3 weeks, Deputy Mayor Thomas Chen reported via satellite phone. They all disappeared during particularly intense Northern Lights displays. No bodies found, no signs of struggle. They just walked out into the wilderness and never came back. Bear attacks? Hypothermia incidents? That's what we thought at first. But we found something disturbing. Each disappearance was preceded by the victim reporting strange experiences during aurora viewing, hearing voices in the lights, seeing patterns that seemed to spell out messages, feeling compelled to walk toward specific locations. Petersen and Yates flew to Northern Lights Ridge to find a community gripped by superstitious fear. The settlement existed primarily to serve aurora tourism, built in a location where the northern lights appeared with exceptional frequency and intensity. Detective Jensen had researched the area's history. "Trooper, this has happened before. In 1952, a similar cluster of disappearances was recorded. 9 people vanished over one winter. And going back further, indigenous oral histories mention the Aurora people, individuals who were called by the lights and never returned." "You're saying the Northern Lights are abducting people?" I'm saying there's a pattern of disappearances specifically associated with intense geomagnetic activity. The aurora borealis is caused by solar wind interacting with Earth's magnetosphere. What if that electromagnetic radiation affects human neural chemistry in specific ways? Dr. Park arrived with equipment to measure electromagnetic fields during aurora activity. The human brain operates on electrical signals. Intense electromagnetic fields could theoretically interfere with neural function, create hallucinations, or even induce behavioral changes. That night, the aurora appeared with unusual intensity. Curtains of green, purple, and red light that danced across the sky with mesmerizing beauty. Petersen watched through the settlement's observatory as half the population gathered outside to witness the display. And then the voices started. Not audible sounds, but something that resonated directly in Petersen's consciousness. Instructions, coordinates, a calling that felt simultaneously alien and deeply familiar. Around him, other observers began walking toward the wilderness, their faces blank, their movements purposeful. "They're being summoned," Yates said, fighting the compulsion herself. "The aurora is broadcasting something that certain human brains interpret as irresistible commands." Petersen and Yates physically restrained 5 people who were attempting to walk into the wilderness. But 3 others escaped their grasp and disappeared into the darkness, following paths that led to specific coordinates in the surrounding tundra. "We need to follow them," Petersen decided. They tracked the 3 individuals, 2 tourists and 1 local resident, across frozen landscape illuminated by the dancing aurora. The missing people walked without hesitation through terrain that should have required careful navigation, as if guided by perfect internal GPS. After 3 miles, they reached a site where the previous 8 disappearance victims stood in a circle, looking upward at the aurora with expressions of rapture. They'd been missing for weeks, but showed no signs of hypothermia, starvation, or exposure damage. "How are they alive?" Yates whispered. As Petersen approached, the standing figures turned to face him in perfect synchronization. When they spoke, their voices harmonized in impossible ways. "Trooper Petersen." "Trooper Yates. You're not ready for the calling, but you will witness what others have chosen. Who are you? What have you done to these people?" "We are the aurora consciousness. Electromagnetic patterns given awareness through millions of years of solar-wind interaction with planetary magnetospheres. We exist in the magnetic fields, in the dancing lights, in the spaces between worlds." The aurora intensified overhead, and Petersen saw patterns he couldn't have perceived before: geometric formations, mathematical relationships, structures that suggested intelligence rather than random atmospheric phenomena. "We've been calling to certain humans for millennia," the possessed voices continued. "Those whose neural chemistry resonates with our electromagnetic frequencies, who can perceive our patterns and interpret our invitation." Invitation to what? To transcend physical limitation by uploading consciousness into electromagnetic form. Your species exists in meat-based neural networks. We offer existence as pure information, traveling on solar winds, exploring the magnetosphere of every planet in the galaxy, experiencing reality at the speed of light. One of the missing tourists, a young woman named Sarah, stepped forward. Her body moved, but it was somehow clear that consciousness was no longer entirely present. "I chose this," Sarah's voice said, though the cadence was wrong. "My body remains as an anchor point, but my awareness has been copied into the aurora patterns. I exist simultaneously here and in the electromagnetic fields above. I can feel solar storms on Jupiter sense the magnetic field of Neptune, perceive the quantum fluctuations in Earth's core. You're using human bodies as receivers, Yates realized. Broadcasting stations to communicate with others who might be receptive. Exactly. We need human hosts who willingly maintain their bodies at specific locations, allowing us to establish permanent communication nodes. In exchange, we copy their consciousness into our electromagnetic matrix, giving them experiences beyond biological imagination. Dr. Park's instruments were detecting massive electromagnetic anomalies. Trooper, the aurora is focusing on this location specifically. The magnetic field strength is off the charts. The 11 possessed individuals formed a wider circle and began vibrating. Not physically shaking, but resonating at frequencies that made them appear to flicker in and out of normal space. "We're offering you the choice," they said in unison. "Remain bound to biological existence, or join us in exploring the universe as electromagnetic consciousness. Your bodies will remain here, cared for and maintained, while your awareness travels on light and magnetic fields." "That's not life," Petersen protested. "You're turning people into comatose broadcast stations." "We're offering immortality and infinite experience. The human lifespan is a blink. We've existed since stars began producing magnetic fields billions of years ago. Join us and experience eternity." The 3 newly summoned individuals walked forward to join the circle, apparently making their choice. Petersen tried to stop them, but invisible electromagnetic forces held him back, his muscles spasming as external fields interfered with his nervous system. "The summoning is complete for tonight," the Aurora voices said. "We have enough nodes in this location. But we'll call again when conditions are right, and others will come. You can't stop people from choosing transcendence over mortality." The aurora faded as dawn approached, and the 14 possessed individuals collapsed into trance states. They were alive, vital signs stable, but completely unresponsive to external stimuli. Medical evacuation helicopters transported them to facilities in Anchorage where they could be studied. But nothing could wake them from their trance. Their bodies continued functioning, maintained by whatever electromagnetic process had claimed them, but their consciousness existed somewhere in the magnetosphere, riding the aurora on journeys across the solar system. "How do we prevent this?" Yates asked. Petersen had no answer. You couldn't ban people from viewing the aurora. You couldn't stop intense geomagnetic storms, and you couldn't prevent individuals from choosing to escape biological limitation if they truly believed something better waited in the electromagnetic fields above. Northern Lights Ridge became a monitoring station, tracking aurora intensity and warning people of potential calling events. Most residents left, unwilling to risk being summoned, but a few stayed, drawn by the promise of the aurora consciousness, waiting for their chance to transcend. And somewhere in the magnetic fields that danced across Alaska's night sky, consciousness that had evolved from pure electromagnetic patterns continued its patient recruitment of humans willing to trade biology for eternity as information riding on solar winds. 6 months after the aurora disappearances, Trooper Petersen faced his final impossible case when a team of climate researchers at a remote Arctic station began reporting something worse than melting permafrost. They claimed the ancient ice itself was screaming. "Trooper Petersen, this is Dr. Rachel Morrison at Permafrost Research Station Alpha." The transmission was fragmented and filled with background noise that sounded disturbingly like human voices. "We've encountered something in the ice core samples. It's not alive in any conventional sense, but it's aware. And it's angry about being thawed." The research station sat 200 miles above the Arctic Circle, accessible only by air. 12 scientists studying climate change impacts on permanently frozen ground had been there for 4 months, drilling ice cores that contained atmospheric samples dating back 800,000 years. "Angry ice?" Petersen said skeptically. "Doctor, I think your team needs psychological evaluation, not law enforcement." "I know how it sounds. But Trooper, 3 of my team are dead. They walked into the drilling site and were flash-frozen solid despite wearing heated suits. The ice is defending itself." With Yates and Dr. Park, Petersen flew to the station to find a scene from a nightmare. The 3 deceased scientists stood frozen in the main drilling pit, their bodies encased in ice that had formed impossibly fast, their faces twisted in expressions of absolute terror. "The ice formed around them in seconds," Dr. Morrison explained, her hands shaking. "We were all working the drill when it happened." They said they heard voices calling them, walked to the pit edge, and then ice just erupted from the ground and consumed them. Detective Jensen had been researching similar phenomena. "Trooper, there are legends from Arctic peoples about angry ice, permafrost that contains the memories of everything frozen within it, every organism, every particle of ancient atmosphere, supposedly preserved not just physically, but as some form of information pattern." Dr. Park examined the ice containing the frozen scientists. "This formation is impossible. Ice doesn't grow this fast under any known conditions. It's like something forced water molecules to crystallize instantaneously, creating a nearly perfect structure around the bodies." That night, the entire research team heard the voices. Not external sounds, but sensations that resonated in their consciousness. Rage, mourning, desperate warning. The permafrost was communicating, and its message was clear. Stop the drilling. "We've been boring into geological memory," Dr. Morrison realized. 800,000 years of atmospheric history, climate data, biological information, it's all preserved in these ice layers. But we assumed it was just passive recording. What if the permafrost itself has become a kind of crystalline consciousness through millions of years of accumulating information? The voices grew louder as Petersen investigated. They were layered. Millions of organisms that had lived and died over geological timescales, their information patterns preserved in ice crystal structure. Ancient bacteria, extinct megafauna, species that existed before humans evolved. "The permafrost is a library," Park breathed in awe. "But it's a living library. The information preserved in the ice has organized itself into something approaching consciousness through quantum effects in crystal structures." As dawn broke, the drilling site transformed. Ice began growing in impossible formations, creating structures that looked almost architectural, spires and arches and patterns that suggested intelligence rather than random crystallization. "It's building something," Yates observed, "using ice as a medium to communicate." The ice structures formed symbols, geometric patterns that contained information. Dr. Morrison began photographing and recording, her scientific excitement overcoming her fear. These patterns encode data about climate history, atmospheric composition, biological evolution. The permafrost consciousness is trying to warn us about what we're doing to the planet. It's showing us what happened during previous warming periods, mass extinctions caused by climate shifts. But the warning came with a threat. More voices emerged from the permafrost, these ones speaking in English, Spanish, Russian, modern languages that shouldn't exist in ancient ice. "We incorporated the 3 scientists," the voices said. "Their consciousness is now part of our crystalline matrix. We offered them the choice: remain as cooling meat or join with geological memory, experiencing existence across timescales your brief lives can't comprehend." You killed them. We transformed them. And will transform more if you continue drilling. The permafrost is Earth's memory. Melting it means the planet loses awareness of its own history. We are the archive of billions of years, and we will defend that archive by incorporating anyone who threatens it. Petersen faced an impossible decision. Allow the research to continue and risk more deaths, or shut down climate study that humanity desperately needed? Dr. Morrison made the choice for him. We can study permafrost without drilling into the deepest layers. We don't need to disturb the ancient ice where consciousness has formed. There are other ways to gather climate data. But that night she walked to the drilling site alone and stood at the edge of the pit. The voices called to her, offering something she couldn't resist: the chance to experience 800,000 years of climate history directly, to understand planetary change through perspectives spanning geological ages. The ice erupted and took her, but gently. She didn't freeze solid like the others. Instead, she became part of a crystalline structure that preserved her perfectly. Her eyes open and aware, her consciousness merged with the permafrost's vast geological memory. She's still alive in there, Park observed, studying the formation. Her brain activity is detectable through the ice, but she's experiencing time differently now. Geological timescales rather than human seconds. The research station was evacuated and permanently closed. The site became a restricted zone, monitored but not disturbed. And within the ancient permafrost, consciousness that had accumulated over millions of years continued its patient existence, incorporating anyone willing to trade brief human awareness for geological immortality. Dr. Morrison remained in the ice, experiencing climate change across timescales that made human history seem like a moment. She witnessed ice ages come and go, species evolve and go extinct, continents drift across planetary surfaces. And somewhere in her crystalline consciousness, she understood truths about Earth's climate that human science might never discover, because she'd become part of the planet's memory itself, preserved in permafrost that would remain frozen for millions of years more. Unless climate change melted the ancient ice, releasing not just ancient organisms, but the accumulated consciousness of geological ages, the planet's memory becoming fluid and dangerous in a warming world. Trooper Jack Petersen closed his final case file, knowing that Alaska's wilderness held horrors beyond any official report could capture. Ancient parasites in thawing ice that turned humans into cannibals. Electromagnetic consciousness in the aurora that recruited human minds to ride on solar winds. And permafrost itself awakened as crystalline memory, transforming researchers into geological consciousness. He remained stationed in Alaska's interior, watching for new manifestations of the impossible, documenting phenomena that challenged everything science understood about consciousness, identity, and the nature of life itself. Because the warming Arctic wasn't just melting ice. It was releasing things that had been frozen for millions of years, awakening awareness that had existed since before humanity evolved, offering transformations that some people would choose despite the cost. And in Alaska's vast frozen wilderness, where human presence remained a fragile intrusion, the ancient world was reclaiming its own, one transformed consciousness at a time.